Sci-Fi-Night Light, where we talk about random topics that somehow relate to sci-fi and horror. Alright, so once again, I am unfortunately apologizing for a long absence, but I don't know, I've just been super busy with work and life and other stuff. Sorry guys, deal with it, but I'm doing my best. Anyway, it's October, and you know what that means.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock.
That's right, it's time for all things spooky and horror. And speaking of horror, man, are there a hell of a lot of subgenres. Slasher horror, monster flicks, sci-fi horror, torture porn, psychological horror, and of course, one of my favorite horror genres, Lovecraftian horror, which is obviously the topic of today's video. Oh, and to clear things up a little bit, Lovecraftian horror is also sometimes called cosmic horror. They basically mean the same thing and are interchangeable. So, in order to properly explain what constitutes Lovecraftian horror, we must first talk about the man who invented it. Author Howard Phillips Lovecraft, sometimes called the godfather of American horror. Lovecraft actually lived a pretty tragic and troubled life, losing both of his parents and spending much of his life secluded and sick. The tragic state of Lovecraft's life no doubt inspired some of his dark works, which unfortunately mostly weren't appreciated until after he was dead in 1937. However, since then, he truly has become a hallmark of horror literature. It must also be mentioned that Lovecraft was an outspoken racist, something that can't be glossed over, even for fans of Lovecraft as myself. It's a truly unfortunate aspect that will forever mar his work, as sometimes that racism does seep into some of his stories. And while he was born in the 1800s, and sure, it was a different time, it's still a way of thinking that needs to be clearly condemned. Now, whatever Lovecraft lacked in racial understanding and compassion, he definitely made up for with a clear mind for horror. He has created fantastic, heavily influential works that have inspired the likes of John Carpenter and Guillermo del Toro.
I have been an enormous fan of Lovecraft since I was a kid. His vision of darkness, of evil, of cosmic horror, of elder beings from beyond is unparalleled.
You know, I bought my first book at age 7. I read one of Lovecraft's stories when I was around that age, and I became absolutely obsessed with the guy.
Lovecraft tells you about the scale of man in the cosmos. So he is really the most articulate about saying there is an indifference from the ancient gods to man. Lovecraft takes that up the ante to the cosmos.
So, what is it about Lovecraft's work that is so unique and influential? And what exactly is Lovecraftian horror? Well, let's start with the latter. I think a great way to summarize a core concept of Lovecraftian horror is by quoting the very first lines of his masterpiece, The Call of Cthulhu, which are as follows. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of a human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each strained in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Alright, so A, that's a pretty good way of putting it, and B, holy shit, is that not a fantastic opening?
There's no end to the possibilities!
Basically, the concept of ignorance being bliss is heavily emphasized in Lovecraft's work, as much of a focus relies on unearthly, unknowable, almost incomprehensible horrors beyond our understanding, about how limited our knowledge and our very minds are to the vast abyss of cosmic terror. We take for granted that we humans as a species are the most advanced and intelligent beings in existence, or at least in our known existence. Something that brings with it a sense of comfort, being able to explain most things about our own universe. And that safety and sense of comfort is constantly challenged in Lovecraft's work. Imagine then being confronted with the existence of ancient civilizations, beings we can barely even describe, let alone understand, or a towering, terrifying being so powerful that human civilization itself comes across as nothing more than an anthill does to us. It's as if these horrifying, ancient, eldritch beings, that their very existence challenges and scares us. It's a concept that is just as terrifying as it is maddening, which is another core concept of Lovecraftian horror, as the lack of comprehension of these terrors only adds even more to the very fear of the unknown that has been instilled in us for millennia. Lovecraftian horror challenges our place in the universe, introducing truly horrifying eldritch beings, infinitely more advanced and powerful, truly casting a shadow over any kind of triumph of a human species. It shatters our very understanding of the world, our view of a food chain, and of course, our position in it.
Results quickly reported over the wireless were baffling and provocative indeed. Existing biology would have to be wholly revised, for this thing was no product of any cell growth science knows about.
Most of the protagonists in Lovecraft's stories are educated, prestigious white men with a seemingly firm understanding of their field and the world. However, the more they learn about the lurking, previously unknown terrors only waiting to be discovered, the more their sanity begins to break down, as the darkest possible horrors imaginable are also the most impossible to explain. And just trying to wrap your brain around it could very well destroy the mind that you're using to do so.
I'm not insane. You hear me? I'm not insane!
The more people understand the terrors brought up in Lovecraft's work, they break down into madness, sometimes falling into cults that worship these forces, and sometimes the terror is too great to bear on the mere human mind, driving the person to suicide.
Where are you going? Stay here. Come back. Stay with us. Come back. Stay here. Stay with us. Come back.
So basically, Lovecraftian or cosmic horror is about stories and concepts that make us question our understanding of the world and our place in it. About ancient, eldritch horrors, whose very existence challenges the way we think, the way we understand things. And that in itself is pretty scary. For example, in the story At the Mountains of Madness, which is definitely one of my favorites, an Arctic research team discovers something that challenges the very knowledge of human history. Remnants of some kind of alien civilization, thousands and thousands of years older than we thought any intelligent life existed on this planet. Beings that are almost impossible just to describe physically, let alone understand. And things even darker, lurking further in the depths. Things that make the beings we discovered seem insignificant in comparison. Whoa. And that's where I'm going to stop the premise, because it is a really good story that I highly recommend, and I will be bringing up a lot more Lovecraft literature later on this month. So, what makes Lovecraftian horror unique and influential is in most part what distinguishes it in the very first place, as our very understanding of the universe breaks down. Many great works of art and fiction that most of you surely know are actually Lovecraftian in concept, whether you were aware of it or not.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy is often cited as some of the best non-Lovecraft cosmic horror out there. What's that, you say? I'm a huge fan of Carpenter and The Thing, and I've never noticed anything Lovecraftian in it. Well, let's take a deeper look. In The Thing, a research team comes into contact with some kind of hostile alien life form capable of mimicking anything it comes into contact with, and mutating it accordingly. A life form whose intentions are not just unknown to us, but ultimately completely unknowable. Just seeing the ever-changing form of his being is enough to freak people the fuck out and mess with their sanity. The very discovery of his being itself is also something that is completely challenging and frightening to a lot of the characters. In Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, which is clearly a nod to H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness,
Hard to believe, isn't it?
we get a film about an insurance investigator beginning to realize that fictional work in a horror writer's stories is actually beginning to materialize as reality, as the lines between the real world and the book world begin to blur, causing sheer madness, as the horrors that this investigator thought were just works of fiction actually seem to become part of reality. Other famous films with Lovecraftian influences or overtones are Ridley Scott's masterpiece Alien, Paul W.S. Anderson's incredibly underrated Event Horizon, Joss Whedon's satirical but excellent The Cabin in the Woods, and even the masterpiece first season of the HBO series True Detective.
Just what is it you found?
Something deep and dark.
Stephen King's The Mist and Junji Ito's Spiral both also have heavy Lovecraft influences, as well as video games like Amnesia, The Dark Descent, and The Sinking City. Honestly, the list could be made unbearably long, so I'll stop it there. But it goes to show how powerful Lovecraftian horror can be on impacting our culture. Oh, and also, Lovecraft stuff usually has tentacles. Lots and lots of tentacles, so do with that what you will.
Ugh! Oh, jeez!
Whether you know it or not, H.P. Lovecraft is immensely influential, something that we realize more and more as we examine horror as a genre itself. Much like the hidden terrors in the author's work, our very concept of horror comes into question the more that we realize how much of a mark Lovecraft left on the genre. Lovecraft's work always leaves us not fully understanding the true depths of a horror's revealed, as we wait, wondering what else is beyond our reach, just waiting on the edge of darkness and our understanding, making us realize that ignorance truly is bliss. So that about does it for this episode of Sci-Fi-Night Light. We hope you enjoyed it. And what's your favorite H.P. Lovecraft story? Let me know in the comments below, where you can also let us know what you thought of this video and give us some suggestions for other stuff as well. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian Vandel Martinez, and I'll catch you guys next time.
Man's relation to man does not captivate my fancy. It is man's relation to the cosmos, to the unknown, which alone arouses in me the spark of creative imagination.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the horror-thon.